Hey YouTubes, Geoffrey here in Vestskogen, Norway. I'm hanging out in the backyard of the Nass family. They have been my host family who has so graciously taken care of me for the past few weeks, and I will get to why I'm hanging out in front of their chickens in just a minute, but just an update. I was speaking with Tore, the host dad, not too long ago, and we've agreed that they are happy with my help and they're willing to host me for the duration of my tourist visa, which expires at the end of October. So I will be here unless I find paid employment somewhere else in Europe for the next 8 or 9 weeks, which is fantastic because I love this area and they treat me exceptionally well. They've been a fantastic family for me, and they serve some absolutely delicious food and really healthy food. They have the same vendetta against sugar that I do, which is just great. But speaking of food, I'll use that as my segue to move into the question where I left off yesterday. Big unanswered question of who suffers because I live in such an amazing place? And it wasn't exactly obvious that anyone has to suffer based on my just going about my day to day. But I guess that kind of depends on your definition of anyone. If we're just talking about humans, well, yeah, you can certainly make some indirect connections to that, but does anyone include the chickens? I've recently read a book by Peter Singer called Animal Liberation, and the main philosophical point of it, which he wrote when he was a grad student at Oxford, he was younger than me when he wrote that, and he pretty much made a solid case that I can't poke any real big holes in. But his biggest argument was against the idea of speciesism. And that is kind of a riff on racism or sexism, and he makes basically the same argument that people who are racist or sexist are saying that because there is some difference in the color of skin or some anatomical difference between us, that is grounds for making a moral difference in how people are treated. And Singer argues that color of skin or genitalia is just as arbitrary as species, which is kind of a radical idea, but I feel like it's becoming less and less radical as more and more people are talking about it. And when you really dig down into it, it kind of makes sense because for pretty much all the things that you could say that makes humans special and makes humans the only species worth us really having any moral consideration for, there are always going to be exceptions, and that has to open the door to what do you do about infants? What about you do about the senile old people? What do you do about the mentally handicapped? And those are questions that are actually worth exploring, and his arguments definitely open that door. But it's also worth exploring what do you do about non-human animals? And in a society that loves its meat, well, that is a very relevant question. If we are going to respect the desires and wishes of these animals who probably don't want to die and definitely don't want to suffer and feel pain, how can we justify eating meat? And I come to this question not just because I conveniently have a prop, but because today was an important day in my life. It was the first time that I watched an animal being slaughtered. They wanted to decrease their number of chickens, and there were a few who were getting old. So I observed as Tore slaughtered 4 chickens. And it was an interesting experience. I don't know if it was really as impactful as I might have thought it was. I definitely did get a little queasy, but it was a very important thing for me to watch and for me to see. And it showed me, I think, probably if you're going to do it, probably the way to do it. When he grabbed the poor chicken whose time was up, He just carried it over to the chopping block, and the chicken clearly was comfortable with people and seemed to be fine being held. And as he was pulling together its wings and legs, and he comforted the chicken and petted it, and he doesn't strike me as a particularly religious man, but I think he said a little prayer to himself, a little gratitude. And with one fell swoop, he picked up the chicken, smacked its head on the chopping block, immediately knocking it unconscious, and in one fluid motion picked up the axe and off with its head. And yes, it only then started to panic and freak out, which was obviously a little bit too late. But as far as I could tell, that chicken pretty much didn't suffer at all. None of them did. A couple of them cried a little bit, but he was able to calm them down before he killed them. And so, if you're going to try to make a case on not eating animals because of their suffering, which Singer really does, well, eating these chickens is about as good as it gets, and even Singer can't really have a real good opposition to that other than some knock-on effects and just not being able to be sure that the animal did live such a good life. But, well, I've seen it. These chickens are super happy back here, and I watched those 4 of them being killed, and there was pretty much no suffering involved. So, yeah. So maybe those chickens didn't have to suffer because we live this life and eat meat and enjoy it, but that doesn't say a whole lot about where we get actually most of our meat. And I certainly encourage anyone who's interested to look into Singer's animal liberation. And now that you're on YouTube, there are plenty of videos out there where he talks about it at length. So I think that'll be my riff for today on not exactly progress, but on some heavy idea to think about. Is when we are considering things so simple as our diet, what kind of impacts does that have? What signals are we sending into the market about what's okay, what's not okay? What ethical principles are we upholding when we check out at the grocery store, when we sit down for dinner? Things to think about. Take care.